Hello, welcome to the Sound of Science, the place where we deconstruct unscientific bogus and silly scams. Let's go get them. Here we've got the famous Christian charlatan clown William Lane Craig, who will explain to you the so-called ontological argument for God. There are several versions of the ontological argument. Craig chooses to propose the version as popularized by the American Alvin Plantinga. He supposedly is a philosopher, but if you really propose the ontological argument as a serious bid for the existence of your God, then I suppose philosophy has lost a substantial part of its standing these days. But anyway, let's first listen to the argument in its entirety, and then pick it apart piece by piece, and dismantle it, because it's a total nonsense argument. Okay, so let's listen to William Lane Craig.
So what is the ontological argument?
The ontological argument, in a nutshell, says that if it's even possible that God exists, then it follows that God actually exists. And basically what Plantinga says is, define a maximally great being to be a being that is metaphysically necessary, omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. Now, if it's possible that there is such a being, then there's a possible world in which that being exists. But if a maximally great being exists in any possible world, it exists in all possible worlds. That's part of what it means to be maximally great. Therefore, it exists in the actual world. Therefore, a maximally great being exists. And the steps of this argument, your viewers may be surprised to learn, are actually relatively uncontroversial. The whole argument stands or falls with the first premise. Is it possible that a maximally great being exists? If you think it's possible that God exists, then you ought to believe that God actually exists.
This is such a bunch of charlatanesque reasoning that it's actually embarrassing that Craig is even trying to fool us with this. Let's go through this step by step, and once you see where he pulls his tricks, it's very easy to expose this argument as an intellectual scam. Guys like Craig and Shapiro are intelligent enough to know that this argument is pure fake. So let's return to step 1.
And basically what Plantinga says is, define a maximally great being to be a being that is metaphysically necessary, omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect.
Now, this first step is pretty predictable and intellectually a bit funny and dishonest. Craig knows that he is going to propose that if it is possible that a God exists, that God actually exists. I know, it's ridiculous, but that is what Craig is proposing. So for him, it's extremely important that he starts with defining a God that fits his specific Christian needs, like omniscient, omnipotent, morally perfect. And then, of course, the Christian God drowns everyone, including babies and children, because he's mad. But anyway, to make sure this story gets a happy ending, Craig needs to define this maximally great being in a way that fits the Christian God, so that when he tricks us into believing his fake reasoning, we end up with the conclusion that his specific Christian God exists, and not another one. That would be pretty painful for Craig. So his first premise is already very problematic. You see, I can propose that we define this supposed maximally great being as a unicorn with spaghetti hair. And if I follow Craig's reasoning, and it is possible for this maximally great being to exist, it turns out that this maximally great being is a unicorn with spaghetti hair. And then according to Craig's reasoning, he now has to admit that this unicorn with spaghetti hair exists. And that is not what Craig had in mind. So right from the start, he is putting the goalposts where he wants them to be. If for some mysterious reason there are people who would be convinced by his ridiculous clown argument, then they should end up believing in Craig's Christian God and not in a unicorn with spaghetti hair.
Now, if it's possible that there is such a being, then there's a possible world in which that being exists.
And this is the exact point where Craig does his intellectual sleight of hand. This is where he really tries to trick his audience, hoping that they will believe in his false reasoning. And of course he knows this, which makes him a charlatan. Craig says, if it is possible that there is such a being, then there is a possible world in which that being exists. See what he did there? This is absolutely refined trickery, and I wonder how many people fall for this. Craig doesn't present us a classic if A exists, then B exists. That would be a totally valid logic model, but Craig won't use it because actual logic won't lead to the conclusions that he desires. The fact is that Craig simply can't prove that his supposed maximally great being exists. So if he would have chosen for if A exists, then B exists, then his argument would have fallen flat right here. He cannot prove that his maximally great being exists, so the rest of his argument becomes pointless then. Instead, Craig now seems to say, if it is possible for A to exist, then it is possible for B to exist, which would have been a valid logical format as well. But this is also not what Craig is doing here, because in the second part of his sentence, he changes the order of the words, giving that part of the sentence a totally different meaning. Craig changes that second half of the sentence into, then there is a possible world in which that being exists. This part of the sentence no longer proposes a possibility or a hypothetical. It now becomes a truth claim. Despite the use of the word possible, the word possible is still there, but has no meaning anymore. There is a possible world just means there is a world. And if there is a world in which A exists, then that just means that A exists. I know, the difference in words seems very subtle. And if you don't watch very carefully, this scam remains undetected, and then Craig can get away with it. But really, what Craig basically says here is, if it is possible for my God to exist, then my God exists, which is the claim he was supposed to prove in the first place. And instead of proving it, he now just repeats the claim. But he disguises it. He pretends it's not a claim but an argument, by changing the order of the words in the second part of his sentence, and by adding the word possible, which has no meaning anymore when it is preceded by the words there is. Again, there is a possible world just means there is a world, meaning that in this sentence, Craig has turned his hypothetical into a truth by magic.
But if a maximally great being exists in any possible world,
which you haven't proven yet. You only repeated the desired outcome of your ontological argument, and you pretend it is true now, while in fact, all you got so far is your hypothetical, which was, if it's possible for a maximally great being to exist. You're still stuck in your hypothetical, if it's possible, which means nothing. If it's possible for Dracula to exist, if it's possible for the Easter Bunny to exist, if it's possible for a god to exist, they're all meaningless hypotheticals if you don't support them with sufficient evidence. And without that evidence, you can only follow up these hypotheticals with other hypotheticals. So if it's possible that your god exists, then it's possible that there is a place where he exists. See how that still means and proves nothing. And that is all you got. If it is possible that Gandalf exists, then it is possible that Frodo exists. That is what you got so far.
It exists in all possible worlds. That's part of what it means to be maximally great. Therefore, it exists in the actual world. Therefore, a maximally great being exists.
We don't even have to deal with the flaws in this part of Craig's reasoning. None of it made any sense after he said, if it is possible for a maximally great being to exist, there is a possible world in which that being exists. That was the main scam moment, and from there on he builds his case on utter nonsense. It's really annoying how people like Craig appear to be somehow respected in the realm of Christian academics. This man talks nonsense over and over again. He makes a lot of money from it, and he must be fully aware of the trickery that he is applying. And of course, also annoying is a guy like Ben Shapiro, who lets Craig talk without asking him any critical question. But of course, Shapiro is in the same boat. He also makes his money by talking nonsense. And people like that are not interested in being interrupted when they deliver their series of rubbish. They all return the favor. They invite each other in their shows and their podcasts, and they earn millions of dollars by making poor, gullible people believe their gibberish. Unfortunately, Christianity is just one of these vehicles that seems to be designed for conmen to benefit from. Yuck, I resent that. So this is where I start to become grumpy. And that might be a good moment for you to subscribe to my channel. But remember, I'm not a Christian God. So if you don't subscribe, I won't send you to the lakes of fire. I won't be flooding your entire village. I'll give you real free will and real free choice. You can subscribe and not subscribe, whatever you desire. And I will wish you a wonderful day regardless. Please show me one God who is as nice as I am. Thanks for watching.